The fabric of reality tore open at the edge of the solar system, bleeding absolute blackness into the cold void. From this artificial wound poured the might of the Galactic Dominion. 10,000 warships, a swarm of metal
Alert
and
level
malice
critical.
so vast it
Divert
blotted
auxiliary
out the
power.
distant starlight.
Stabilize the core.
They moved in
Rerouting
perfect,
now.
terrifying synchronization, a mechanical leviathan come to swallow the world. Commander Zorak stood on the observation
Crew,
deck of the
report
flagship,
status
his
immediately.
hands
The
clasped
anomaly
behind
is
his scale
growing. We
back.
must act now.
He looked at
Initiate
the tactical
lockdown. Hold the line.
display. Nothing. The system was entirely empty. No orbital defense platforms, no patrol fleets, not even a stray mining vessel. Just the silent spinning planets and the pale yellow star at the center. Zorak's mouth curled into a slow, contemptuous sneer. 11,000 years of Dominion rule, and the story was always the same. Another primitive world, another easy harvest. Then the silence broke. It did not break with the boom of artillery, but with a high-pitched digital scream that echoed across the bridges of all 10,000 ships simultaneously. Zorak's eyes darted to the main console. The tactical screen blank a second ago exploded in a blinding array of crimson warning runes. 4,812 invisible targeting lasers had just painted the hulls of the Dominion Vanguard. The lock-on sequence took exactly 1.4 seconds. Report! Zorak barked, his voice cracking like a whip. Sir, we are being scanned. The navigation officer stammered, his multi-jointed fingers flying across dead consoles. They are inside our mainframe. They are reading our shield frequencies, our reactor outputs, our life support data. Before Zorak could issue a command, the enormous panoramic viewport of the flagship flickered. The starfield vanished. In its place, projected across the screen, 300 feet wide, was a human face. It was an older man. His hair was iron gray, cut in severe military lines. His eyes were the color of deep winter ice calm and entirely devoid of fear. He wore a dark, immaculate uniform devoid of flashy medals. Commander Zorak, the human said. His voice was a low, resonant rumble, translated flawlessly into the Dominion's own encrypted military dialect. I am Admiral Silas Vance. You have exactly 60 seconds to turn your fleet around. Zorak bared his fangs. A bluff. It had to be a desperate, pathetic bluff. Open a firing channel, arm the forward plasma batteries, burn them from the sky. I am trying, Commander. The weapons officer gasped, panic finally bleeding into his tone. But the slip-space drives, the engines... Zorak looked at the master readouts. The numbers were free-falling. 90%, 50%, 10%, 0. Across 10,000 dreadnoughts, the engines died. The Great Dominion Armada was completely, utterly paralyzed, drifting like dead metal in the freezing dark. On the screen, Silas Vance did not smile. Your 60 seconds are up. They do not know it yet, Commander, but your empire died the moment you entered our space. 40 days earlier, on the capital world of Threx Prime, the air had been thick with the scent of incense and old dust. The Grand Council Chamber of the Galactic Dominion was a monument to subjugation. Banners of 1,000 conquered species hung from the vaulted ceilings. At the center of it all sat High Arbiter Xylox. He was a towering insectoid creature, his exoskeleton polished to a mirror shine. He flicked a clawed finger against a glowing holographic star map. The map zoomed in on a small, unremarkable spiral arm of the galaxy. It highlighted a single blue dot. Species 4217. Classification. Xylox asked, his voice a clicking metallic rasp. A small four-armed archivist scrambled forward, clutching a data tablet to her chest. Class 2 High Arbiter. Early technology. Fragmented governments. They call themselves humans. Xylox waved a hand dismissively. Standard harvest. Assign Commander Zorak and 10,000 vessels. Strip their oceans, burn their cities, process the survivors for the labor camps. The archivist hesitated. Her lower hands trembled. High Arbiter, if I may. There is an anomaly in the deep archives regarding this system. A warning from the first surveyor centuries ago. It classifies them as an apex predator species. It mandates permanent avoidance. Xylox stopped. He slowly turned his massive head, his compound eyes boring into the terrified archivist. The Dominion avoids nothing. We are the apex. Send the fleet. He did not know that his encrypted transmission beamed across the galaxy on a frequency deemed mathematically unbreakable was caught like a fly in a web. 2,000 feet beneath the granite spine of the American Rocky Mountains, the Earth hummed with the power of a hidden world. This was the nerve center of the Void Wardens, a subterranean fortress of steel concrete and quantum processors. For 60 years, the governments of Earth had buried their finest minds and their darkest secrets here. They had watched the stars. They had listened to the screams of dying alien worlds. They knew what was coming. In the primary command center, bathed in the blue light of massive tactical displays, Admiral Silas Vance stood like a statue carved from the mountain itself. Footsteps echoed on the steel grating. Dr. Aris Thorne, the lead cryptanalyst, approached the command dais. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes a testament to weeks without sleep, but his hands were steady as he handed a physical data pad to the Admiral. "We cracked it," Thorne said quietly. Vance looked at the pad. "How long?" 11 minutes and 30 seconds. Thorne replied, a ghost of a smirk touching his lips. An 11,000-year-old empire and their absolute highest tier of military encryption took our quantum arrays less than 12 minutes to unravel. Vance read the translated text. 10,000 ships. Commander Zorak. A mandate for total extinction. The room around them, filled with dozens of operators, analysts, and generals, fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. 10,000 alien warships were on their way. It was a number that defied human comprehension. It was the apocalypse quantified. "They expect to find us blind," Vance said softly, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "They expect to find a divided primitive world screaming into the dark. They think they are the hunters." He turned to the main operations board. "Initiate the lockdown. Wake the Outer Rim assets. We have prepared for 60 years for this exact hour. When they arrive, we will not fight a war. We will execute a localized extermination." And now that execution had begun. Back in the cold vacuum of the outer solar system, Commander Zorak watched the giant projection of Silas Vance fade into static. The panic on the Dominion Bridge was palpable. The invincible fleet was dead in the water. "Sensors are picking up movement," the tactical officer shouted over the blaring alarms. "Asteroid Belt Sector 4, massive energy signatures, millions of them." "Fighters," Zorak demanded, trying to project a non-existent authority. "No, sir, too small, and there are too many." From the dark, jagged rocks of the asteroid belt, a black river flowed into space. It was a swarm of 2.4 billion autonomous drones. They were sleek, silent, and incredibly fast. They did not carry explosives. They carried highly focused electromagnetic disruptors and corrosive acid payloads. The swarm hit the paralyzed Dominion fleet like a tidal wave of locusts. The soundless impacts vibrated through the hulls of the alien dreadnoughts. The drones latched onto sensor arrays, communication dishes, and navigation optics. In a matter of seconds, they detonated their EMP charges and vented their acid. "We are blind," Zorak's navigation officer screamed. "Visuals are down, radar is down, target locks are offline." 87% of the Dominion fleet's sensory capabilities were wiped out in the first 3 minutes of the engagement. They were 10,000 blind giants swinging wildly in the dark. Zorak ordered blind fire, and the Dominion ships began shooting blindly into space, occasionally hitting their own vessels in the chaotic, sightless panic. "Sir," a faint voice came from the comm station. "I am picking up a new thermal signature. Very close. Slipping past the drone swarm." Deep in the shadows of the void, Captain Nix Harper sat in the command chair of the EWS Consequence. Her ship was a spearhead of black adaptive armor designed to absorb light and deflect radar. It was a stealth dreadnought, the crowning achievement of human engineering. And she was not alone. Spread out in a perfect predatory crescent were 199 identical ships, 200 human dreadnoughts against 10,000 alien warships. Harper's palms were slick with sweat inside her flight gloves. She had run this simulation 1,000 times over 15 years of rigorous, brutal training. But this was not a simulation. Those were real ships filled with real monsters who wanted to burn her home to ash. She took a slow, deep breath, steadying her heart rate. She remembered the doctrine: control, precision, absolute violence. "All ships," Harper said into her comms unit, her voice tight but entirely steady. "Drop cloaks. Weapons free." 200 human dreadnoughts materialized out of the vacuum like ghosts stepping into the light. The adaptive armor on their hulls shifted, locking into combat configuration. The slaughter began. The human ships moved with a terrifying algorithmic grace. They did not engage in chaotic dogfights. They picked their targets and executed them. Kinetic accelerator rounds firing solid tungsten slugs at a fraction of the speed of light tore through the Dominion's shields as if they were made of wet paper. A Dominion cruiser managed to get a blind shot off a searing beam of green plasma that struck the hull of the Consequence. Harper flinched, bracing for the impact. "Hull status," she barked. "Armor is adapting, Captain." Her defense officer reported, his fingers flying. Billions of microscopic sensors analyze the thermal impact. The molecular structure is realigning. Shield integrity at 92% and holding. They just made us stronger. Harper allowed herself a fierce predatory smile. Return fire, core their reactor. A tungsten slug left the railgun of the Consequence in a flash of blue light. It pierced the center of the Dominion cruiser, igniting its dark matter reactor. The alien ship collapsed in on itself before expanding into a silent, brilliant sphere of atomic fire. The battle lasted exactly 114 minutes. It was a systematic dismantling. The Dominion fleet, built to overwhelm inferior forces with sheer brute numbers, had no countermeasure for a technologically superior enemy striking from the shadows. The human fleet hunted them down sector by sector. Ship by ship, the grand armada of high arbiter Xylox was reduced to floating graveyards of twisted metal and frozen alien corpses. In the subterranean command center beneath the Rockies, the tactical map was a sea of extinguishing red dots. The human operators worked in a state of hyper-focused silence, calling out coordinates and confirming kills. Silas Vance stood with his hands behind his back, watching the massacre. He did not celebrate. He did not cheer. He watched the numbers drop with the cold calculation of an accountant auditing a debt. "Admiral," Dr. Thorne said, stepping up beside him, "enemy fleet strength is at 6%. 9,400 Dominion vessels have been destroyed. The remaining 600 are severely crippled. Their warp drives are attempting to reboot. Captain Harper is requesting permission to close the net," the communications officer called out. "She says they can wipe the rest of them out in 6 minutes. Vance stared at the holographic projection of the remaining 600 alien ships huddled together like frightened animals in the dark. He could end it right now. He could ensure not a single one of those monsters ever saw their homeworld again. "Tell Captain Harper to hold her fire," Vance said. Thorne turned to look at him, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Admiral, we have them by the throat." Vance turned his icy gaze toward the crypt analyst. "I know. And if we kill them, all the Dominion will simply assume they ran into a spatial anomaly or a rogue black hole. They will learn nothing." Vance looked back at the screen, watching the crippled ships desperately spinning up their drives. "Let them run. Let them limp back to Threx Prime. Let them show Xylox their shattered hulls and their terrified eyes. We are not just destroying a fleet today, Ares. We are destroying an ideology. We are planting a seed of absolute terror in the heart of an empire." Vance stepped up to the primary communication terminal. He opened a wideband channel broadcasting on all frequencies, ensuring every surviving Dominion ship would hear his voice. "Commander Zorak, if you are still alive to hear this, consider yourself a messenger." Vance's voice echoed through the bridge of the battered alien flagship where Zorak lay bleeding on the floor, surrounded by the sparks of dying consoles. "We are letting you go," Vance continued, his tone devoid of any arrogance, delivering the words like a physical blow. "Return to your High Arbiter. Tell him exactly what happened here today. Tell him that the harvest is over. And tell him that if he ever looks toward our star again, we will not wait for him to come to us." In a flash of distorted light, the surviving 600 ships tore open the fabric of space and fled, leaving behind a massive floating monument to their own hubris. Underneath the Rocky Mountains, the command center remained silent for a long moment. Then a slow, rolling wave of applause began to build. It swelled, echoing off the concrete walls, the sound of a species realizing they were no longer prey. But Silas Vance did not clap. He turned away from the screen, his face grim, his mind already calculating the variables of the future. He knew the psychology of empires. He knew that pride was a poison that made creatures do desperate, catastrophic things. "They will be back," Vance said quietly to Thorn, even as the room cheered around them. "Xylox will not let this stand. He will empty his galaxy to save his pride." Thorn looked at the Admiral, the reality of the situation settling over him like a cold shroud. "Then what was this?" "This," Vance said, walking toward the heavy steel doors of the command center, "was just the opening chord. The real war hasn't even begun." The shadow of the Galactic Dominion was vast, but it was not impenetrable. It was built on a foundation of terror, a fragile construct that relied entirely on the illusion of absolute invincibility. Admiral Silas Vance knew that to kill a god, you did not just stab it in the heart. You made it bleed in front of its worshippers. Deep in the neutral trading sector of the outer galaxy station, Orin forehung like a rust-colored jewel against the black canvas of space. It was a miserable place. A sprawling, unregulated hub where 100 subjugated species mingled under the oppressive, watchful eyes of Dominion overseers. The air smelled of ozone-cheap synthesized fuel and the metallic tang of despair. In the heart of the Central Market Concourse, Ambassador Lyra Sterling sat at a low, dimly lit table. Officially, she was a mid-level mineral trader from a minor rim world, her human features concealed beneath a localized holographic displacement shroud. Unofficially, she was the highest-ranking intelligence operative the Void Wardens had ever placed beyond the solar system. She had spent 11 years breathing recycled air, memorizing alien dialects, and mapping the psychological fault lines of the Dominion's slave empire. She took a slow sip of a bitter, cobalt-colored drink. Her eyes remained fixed on the massive propaganda screens suspended from the concourse ceiling. The screens played a continuous loop of Dominion victories, showing pristine warships hovering over burning planets. A reminder to the chain that their chains were forever. Then the data packet arrived. It was a tiny encrypted burst sent on a phantom subspace frequency buried beneath the station's ambient noise. Lyra's concealed neural link chimed once. It was a single line of text from Silas Vance. "Light the match." Lyra set her glass down. She reached into the lining of her heavy trader's coat and pressed her thumb against a smooth, dark metallic disc no larger than a coin. Instantly, every screen on Station Orin 4 went black. The low, constant hum of the market died away. Thousands of beings, towering stone-skinned laborers, amphibious merchants, four-armed mechanics, stopped in their tracks. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the concourse. The Dominion overseers, clad in their gleaming black armor, reached for their weapons, their insectoid eyes scanning the crowd for a threat. The screens flared back to life. But it was no longer Dominion propaganda. It was raw, unedited tactical footage from the solar system. The audio track hit them first. It was the frantic, panicked screaming of Dominion commanders, the high-pitched wail of failing warp drives. And then came the visual. The unassailable, godlike warships of the Dominion Armada were drifting blind and helpless. A collective gasp echoed through the cavernous market. Beings who had not dared to look up in generations suddenly found themselves staring at the impossible. They watched as human dreadnoughts materialized from the void like phantoms. They saw the adaptive armor of the Earth vessels, absorbing direct plasma strikes, the hulls shimmering and realigning at the molecular level to negate the damage. They watched mesmerized as tungsten rounds traveling at relativistic speeds poured through Dominion flagships, shattering them like glass. In the corner of the market, a massive stone-hided slave named Geral stood frozen. For 800 years, his species had been bred to break rocks in the deep mines of Wrath Prime. His back was mapped with the scars of Dominion energy whips. He watched a Dominion dreadnought, the very symbol of his people's eternal torment, snap in half and burn silently in the vacuum of space. Geral's massive rock-like hands slowly curled into fists. A deep seismic rumble began in his chest. It was a sound his people had forgotten how to make. It was a laugh. Across the station, the reaction was the same. Fear gave way to shock, and shock ignited into something far more dangerous. Hope. The Dominion overseers began shouting firing warning shots into the ceiling, desperate to turn the screens off. But the broadcast was locked into the station's deep architecture. Lyra Sterling stood up, pulling the hood of her coat over her head. She did not look back as the first stone-skinned laborer lunged at an overseer, tearing the energy rifle from the guard's hands with terrifying ease. The match was lit. The fire was spreading. 4,000 light-years away on the capital world of Threx Prime High Arbiter Xylox did not feel the heat of the fire, but he felt the cold draft of fear. The Grand Council chamber was a cathedral of dark stone and severe angles. It was designed to make any individual feel infinitesimal. But today, the vastness of the room only magnified the silence. Xylox sat on his elevated throne, his mandibles clicking in a rhythmic, agitated tempo. Below him, floating in the center of the chamber, was a holographic projection of the 600 ships Silas Vance had allowed to return. They were a graveyard of metal dragging itself through the void. Hulls were scorched, black bulkheads were violently decompressed, and the once proud insignias of the Dominion were melted into slag. They had limped into the capital's orbit an hour ago, broadcasting no victory codes, only medical distress signals. A pair of royal guards dragged the broken form of Commander Zorak into the center of the chamber. The proud reptilian warlord was missing his left arm, and his scales were ash gray with radiation burns. He could barely stand, supported only by the grip of the guards. "You were given 10,000 ships," Xylox said. His voice was not a shout. It was a terrifying metallic whisper that echoed off the obsidian walls. "You were ordered to harvest a Class II primitive species. You returned to me with scrap metal." Zorak forced his head up. His eyes, once full of arrogant fire, were completely hollow. He had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had worn a human face. "They are not primitive, High Arbiter," Zorak rasped, his voice trembling. "They knew we were coming. They had mapped our approach, decrypted our highest ciphers, and waited for us in the dark. They have ships that heal themselves. They have weapons we cannot calculate. They let us go." A murmur of genuine horror rippled through the assembled politicians and generals in the chamber. "Silence," Xylox roared, standing up from his throne. His towering frame cast a long, jagged shadow across the floor. "They let you go because they are cowards, hiding behind parlor tricks. They used an ambush. A momentary lapse in our vigilance. But they are confined to a single system. We are the galaxy." Zorak shook his head slowly. "You do not understand. The human Admiral Vance. He looked at us not as a threat. He looked at us as an equation he had already solved." Xylox raised a hand. One of the royal guards activated a plasma blade and drove it cleanly through Zorak's chest. The commander collapsed without a sound, a smoking hole in his center. "There is no equation the Dominion cannot erase," Xylox hissed, stepping over the body. He looked up at the gathered military echelon. "They wish to send a message by sparing our crippled. We will send our own. Assemble the Grand Armada." The Grand Marshal of the fleet stepped forward, his exoskeleton rattling. "High Arbiter, the Grand Armada that requires pulling the defense fleets from every sector in the Empire. We would be leaving the subjugated systems completely unguarded. There will be no subjugated systems left if we allow this insult to stand." Xylox bellowed, the panic finally breaking through his rage. "The footage of Zorak's humiliation is already spreading across the subspace networks. The slaves are watching. If we do not crush this Earth, if we do not turn their star system into a radioactive dead zone by the end of the month, the Empire will tear itself apart. Bring me everything. 200,000 ships. We will drown them in our numbers." And the decree was absolute. The gears of the greatest war machine in history began to turn. But Xylox, blinded by his own frantic pride, failed to see the rot at the core of his own machine. High up in the tiered balconies of the council chamber, Minister Vale watched the execution of Zorak with cold, calculating eyes. She belonged to a species known for their vast cognitive processing capabilities employed by the Dominion to manage the astronomical logistics of their empire. She was not a warrior, she was a mathematician, and the math was screaming at her. As the chamber emptied, Vale retreated to her private archival sanctum. The room was bathed in the soft green glow of data streams pouring down massive crystalline pillars. She walked to the central console and pulled up the fragmented sensor logs retrieved from Zorak's surviving ships. She watched the combat data. She analyzed the trajectory of the human tungsten rounds. She studied the thermal dissipation rates of their adaptive armor. It was an elegant, terrifying dance. The human ships encased in a liquid metal matrix utilized billions of microscopic sensors to analyze the frequency of incoming energy weapons. Within nanoseconds, the hull reconfigured its molecular density to perfectly disperse the heat. The Dominion was firing plasma at a wall that learned how to eat plasma. But it wasn't the technology that terrified Vale. It was the tactical restraint. The humans had destroyed over 9,000 ships in less than 2 hours. The spatial geometry of their ambush was flawless. They had a 0% margin of error. They had total operational control. Yet, they had stopped. Vale ran a simulation. If a species possessed the tactical acumen to perfectly trap and annihilate 10,000 ships without taking a single loss, what would they do if 200,000 ships arrived? The simulation processed the data. The result flashed on her screen. Extinction. Not for the humans, for the Dominion. Xylox was not sending an armada to conquer Earth. He was marching the entire military infrastructure of their civilization into a meat grinder. He was abandoning the empire to protect his ego. Vale closed her eyes. She felt no loyalty to the humans, but she felt a profound, desperate loyalty to her own species. If the Dominion's military was erased in the solar system, the enslaved races would rise up and slaughter every Dominion citizen left behind. The only way to survive was to ensure the humans knew exactly what was coming, in the hope that their cold, calculating admiral might show them the same mercy he showed Zorak's survivors. Her fingers flew across the console. She bypassed the internal security protocols using clearance codes she had been compiling for a decade. She dug into the deepest military mainframes. She found the Grand Armada's deployment files, the slip space staging coordinates, the supply line logistics, the shield modulation frequencies for all 200,000 vessels. She compressed the data into a single heavily encrypted packet. She did not use a Dominion channel. She sent it through the chaotic and regulated frequencies of the civilian trading networks, bouncing it off 100 different relay stations until its origin was impossible to trace. She addressed it simply to the Void Wardens. When she pressed send, Vale knew she had just committed the greatest act of treason in the 11,000-year history of the galaxy. She sat back in her chair, listening to the hum of the data servers, waiting for the end of the world. Back on Earth, underneath the crushing weight of the Rocky Mountains, the air in the command center was stale with the smell of ozone-burnt coffee and adrenaline. The operators had barely slept since the destruction of the Vanguard fleet. Silas Vance stood in the same spot he had occupied for 48 hours. His eyes were fixed on the deep space telemetry screens. He was a man who lived in the future, his mind constantly cycling through 1,000 terrible possibilities. Dr. Eris Thorne burst through the heavy steel doors of the command center. He wasn't walking, he was practically sprinting. He carried a secure data tablet, his knuckles white from gripping it so hard. "Admiral," Thorne breathed out, coming to a halt beside Vance. "We just caught a massive data burst on the civilian trading band. It bypassed our outer firewalls completely. It had our name on it." Vance didn't turn his head. "Source, untraceable, bounced through 100 neutral sectors," Thorne said, tapping the screen to transfer the data to the main holographic table. "But the encryption, Admiral, it's Dominion High Command level. Someone on the inside just handed us the keys to the kingdom." The holographic table flared to life. A three-dimensional map of the galaxy materialized. Slowly, it began to populate with red dots. First a few hundred, then thousands, then tens of thousands. The red dots clustered around major Dominion military shipyards, forming massive fleets. The tactical data scrolled down the side of the display. The room went dead silent. The operator stopped typing. The low hum of the servers seemed to fade away. They were looking at a number that broke the human mind. 200,000 warships. Thorne whispered, the blood draining from his face. He looked at Vance. "They are mobilizing every asset they have. Carriers, dreadnoughts, planetary siege engines. They are abandoning their colonies to bring it all here. The ratio is 16-1. Admiral, it's a mathematical impossibility. We don't have enough ammunition to kill them all, even if they lined up and let us shoot them." Vance stepped up to the holographic table. The red dots were beginning to move, converging on a staging point just 2 light years outside the solar system. He looked at the staggering numbers, but he did not see an invincible armada. He saw a bloated, panicked beast charging blindly into the dark. "Look at their supply lines," Vance said, his voice cutting through the panic in the room like a scalpel. He pointed to the empty space behind the advancing red dots. "They are stripping their garrisons. They are pulling the guards off the walls of their own prison." Vance turned to his communications officer. Get me Ambassador Sterling on the quantum relay. A moment later, the audio channel clicked open. Sterling here, Admiral. What is the status of the outer rim? Vance asked. Lyra Sterling's voice came through distorted by the vast distance, but underlined with a fierce, unmistakable energy. The footage worked, Admiral. The Dominion is bleeding. We are seeing coordinated uprisings on 6 major mining worlds. The stone-skinned laborers on Wrath Prime just overran their overseers using the kinetic rifles we smuggled to them. The amphibious sectors have severed the Dominion fuel pipelines. The Empire is hollowing itself out. Let them burn their own house down, Vance said. Keep feeding them tactical intel. Give the slaves everything they need to tear the Dominion apart from the inside. We just need to hold the door. Understood, Admiral. Good luck. The channel closed. Vance looked back at the holographic map. The Great Red Wave was cresting. In less than 20 days, the sky over Earth would be entirely blocked out by alien steel. He turned to his senior staff. The fear in their eyes was real, and it was justified. They were about to face the wrath of an empire that had ruled the stars since humanity was living in caves. They are bringing 200,000 ships, Vance said, his voice steady, anchoring the room. They believe this is a war of attrition. They believe they can simply drown us in their blood and steel. But Xylox has made a fatal miscalculation. He thinks we built a fleet to fight him. Vance walked over to a secondary console, a terminal completely disconnected from the main tactical grid. It required dual biometric scans and a physical key to activate. He placed his hand on the scanner. We didn't build a fleet to fight a war, Vance said, turning the physical key. The heavy blast doors at the back of the command center groaned as massive physical locks began to disengage. We built a fleet to herd them into the slaughterhouse. The screens on the secondary console flickered on. They did not show ship schematics or troop deployments. They showed the furious churning surface of the sun. Deep within the star's corona, massive artificial structures were silhouetted against the blinding light. Send the order to all Allied and Earth forces, Vance commanded. Assume defensive positions around the inner planets. They will break through our initial lines. We will let them. Let them think they are winning. Let them push deep into the system. Thorne swallowed hard, staring at the solar telemetry. Admiral, if they get past Mars, they will have Earth in firing range. They won't get the chance, Vance said, his eyes reflecting the harsh blue light of the tactical grid. When the core of their armada crosses the orbital threshold of Jupiter, we will show them the fire they are playing with. Out in the black, the Grand Armada moved. It was a terrifying procession of mechanical death. 200,000 warp drives tore through the fabric of space, leaving a wake of gravitational distortion that could be felt across light years. Ships the size of small moons, bristling with plasma batteries and gravity bombs, moved in a formation so dense it generated its own localized gravitational pull. Aboard the super dreadnought Apex, the replacement flagship of the Armada, the new fleet commander stared at the forward sensors. He had been ordered to execute a total planetary glassing. No survivors, no prisoners, just ash. Behind them, their empire was in flames. The distress calls from the slave worlds were a constant screaming static on the comms channels. The Dominion was losing its grip on the galaxy with every light year they traveled away from it. The pressure on the commander was absolute. He had to annihilate this human world quickly to prove that the Dominion still held the power of life and death, so they could return and crush the rebellions. We are dropping out of slip space in T-3 minutes. The navigation officer reported, his voice tight. All ships shields to maximum, the commander ordered. Arm all forward batteries. When we drop, we do not pause. We drive straight into their system. We crush whatever pathetic ambush they have set, and we burn their world. The timer ticked down. 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute. Dropping to real space, the officer announced. The universe tore open again. The Grand Armada poured into the edge of the solar system. The sheer visual impact of 200,000 ships appearing simultaneously caused a massive displacement of cosmic dust and radiation. They blotted out the distant stars. They were a wall of metal and malice ready to extinguish humanity. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, the alarms in the Void Warden's command center screamed to life. The holographic table turned entirely red. Visual confirmation, Thorne said, his voice shaking despite his best efforts to control it. They are here, all of them. 200,000 signatures confirmed. Silas Vance stood perfectly still. He looked at the impossible odds. He looked at the massive red wave about to crash against the tiny blue dot of Earth. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. "Hold the line," Vance whispered. The solar system held its breath. The greatest battle in the history of the galaxy was about to begin. The abyss of space did not simply fill with ships. It was replaced by them. 200,000 Dominion warships dropped from slipspace in a staggered, jagged wall that stretched across millions of miles of the outer solar system. It was an eclipse made of iron and dark matter. They blotted out the distant constellations, casting a long, terrifying shadow over the gas giants. Against this monolithic tide stood the defense fleet of Earth and her newfound allies. 12,000 ships, a patchwork coalition of black-hulled human dreadnoughts, retrofitted mining barges, and stolen Dominion cruisers piloted by liberated slaves. They hung in the void just beyond the orbit of Jupiter, a thin, fragile line of light daring the darkness to cross. In the cockpit of a human interceptor, Lieutenant David Miller felt his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The vibration of the twin ion engines hummed through his flight suit, a physical reminder of the thin sheet of metal separating him from the freezing vacuum. He looked at his tactical display. The screen was a solid wall of crimson, targeting locks. "Vanguard actuals to all fighter wings," the voice of his squadron leader crackled in his earpiece. It was tight, strained with the impossible weight of the math. "They are launching interceptor swarms. Estimated numbers. Countless. Hold the line. Make them bleed for every inch of vacuum." Miller gripped the flight yoke. His knuckles were white. He was 26 years old. He had trained in simulators that threw impossible odds at him, but the simulators never captured the cold, suffocating terror of the real thing. Through his canopy, the blackness of space suddenly lit up with a billion tiny flashes of green plasma. The Dominion swarm was coming. 50 alien fighters shaped like jagged arrowheads peeled off the main armada and dove straight toward Miller's sector. His targeting computer shrieked, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of data. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped his throat. His hand shook. A Dominion energy bolt lashed across his port wing, vaporizing a layer of adaptive armor. The impact threw his ship into a violent, sickening spin. "Breathe." The word echoed in his mind, the ghost of his flight instructor standing over his shoulder. "Breathe, assess, execute." Miller forced his lungs to expand. He slammed his fist into the manual override, killing the spin with a harsh thrust of his maneuvering jets. He didn't look at the massive red wall on his radar. He looked at the single leading arrowhead in his canopy. He pulled the yoke back, aligning his crosshairs. He squeezed the trigger. The interceptor's dual railguns fired. Twin streaks of blue kinetic light sliced through the dark, impacting the alien fighter. Its shields flared, overloaded and shattered. The kinetic rounds cored the ship, turning it into a silent, expanding cloud of debris. Miller didn't pause. Muscle memory took over. He rolled his ship beneath a volley of plasma fire, locked onto a second target and fired. Then a third. Then a fourth. 4 kills. 9 seconds. "I have them," Miller whispered to himself, a manic, desperate energy taking hold. "I have them." But the math was absolute. For every fighter he destroyed, 10 more took its place. A heavy Dominion cruiser angled its forward batteries toward his squadron. A localized gravity bomb detonated 2 miles off his starboard bow. The shockwave, a ripple in space-time itself, slammed into Miller's ship. His control panel exploded in a shower of sparks. The primary shield generator wailed a high-pitched mechanical scream before dying completely. The display flashed a brutal, uncompromising red. Shields 0%. Hull integrity failing. "Miller, punch out," his squadron leader shouted over the comms right before his own transmission cut off in a burst of violent static. Miller looked out the canopy. The void was filled with burning metal. He saw Allied ships crewed by beings who had tasted freedom for less than a week, ramming their vessels into Dominion carriers when their weapons ran dry. He saw human dreadnoughts trading point-blank broadsides with ships 10 times their size. He reached for the ejection handle. The last thing he saw before the blast canopy sealed him was the endless, unstoppable tide of the Dominion core fleet pushing past the wreckage of his squadron. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, the command center was a tomb of flashing red lights and frantic, overlapping voices. "We are losing the outer perimeter." the tactical officer reported, his voice cracking. Casualties are exceeding all projections. 4,200 dead in the last 40 minutes. The Allied vanguard is breaking. Admiral Silas Vance stood at the center of the room. The blue light from the holographic map painted his face in stark, unforgiving shadows. He watched the thin blue line of his fleet being pushed backward, sector by sector, toward the inner planets. Admiral Dr. Eris Thorne, said, his voice a harsh whisper. He was staring at a secondary screen, watching the biometric telemetry of thousands of pilots flatlining in real time. They are bleeding us dry. The Dominion core fleet, 50,000 super dreadnoughts, has broken through the asteroid belt. They are ignoring our flanking maneuvers. They are driving straight for Earth. Vance did not move. His eyes tracked the massive concentrated cluster of red dots moving like a spearhead toward the orbit of Mars. Captain Harper, Vance said, his voice eerily calm amidst the chaos. Status. On the main screen, the image of Captain Nix Harper appeared. Her face was streaked with soot and in sweat. The bridge of the EWS Consequence was filled with smoke, and warning klaxons blared relentlessly in the background. We are holding them in the dust cloud above Mars, Admiral. Harper coughed, wiping blood from her forehead. But the adaptive armor is saturated. We can't shed the thermal energy fast enough. They are just throwing too much mass at us. If we don't fall back to Earth orbit now, we are going to burn. Vance looked at the spatial coordinates. The Dominion's spearhead, the absolute heart of their military might, had crossed the orbital threshold of Mars. 50,000 of the most heavily armed warships in the galaxy packed tightly together in an unbreakable wedge formation, confident in their impending victory. They were exactly where he needed them to be. Hold your position for exactly 90 seconds, Captain, Vance said. Then initiate an immediate blind slip space jump toward the dark side of the moon. Do not wait for confirmation. Harper didn't question the order. 90 seconds. Understood. Vance terminated the connection. The command center fell into a strange, suffocating hush. Everyone in the room turned to look at the Admiral. They knew what was coming. They had worked on the theories, they had built the infrastructure, but none of them truly believed the human race was capable of wielding it. Vance walked slowly toward the elevated dais at the back of the room. He stepped up to the heavy, disconnected terminal. The biometric lock scanned his retinas and his fingerprints. A thick, reinforced glass panel slid back, revealing 2 analog keyholes and a heavy brass switch. Dr. Thorne, Vance said. Thorne stepped up to the dais. He reached under his shirt and pulled out a heavy steel key on a titanium chain. His hands were shaking so violently, he could barely slot the key into the terminal. Vance produced an identical key. On my mark, Vance said. He looked up at the massive holographic projection of the solar system. The red spearhead of the Dominion fleet was bearing down on the inner planets, a swarm of mechanical locusts about to devour a garden. They thought they were the apex predators. They thought 11,000 years of cruelty had made them gods. Mark, Vance said. They turned the keys simultaneously. Vance reached out and grasped the heavy brass switch. He did not hesitate. He threw it forward. Protocol Prometheus is active, Vance said. His voice echoed through the subterranean chamber like a gavel striking wood. For 30 years, humanity had not just been building ships. Ships were fragile. Ships could be broken. Silas Vance had realized decades ago that the only way to fight a galaxy-spanning empire was to wield the galaxy itself. Deep in the center of the solar system, the sun woke up. It was not a natural solar flare. For 3 decades, autonomous human drones had been sinking into the sun's corona or anchoring massive magnetic tethers directly into the star's fusion core. It was an engineering marvel of terrifying scale, a network of invisible hyperdense magnetic fields designed to capture, compress, and channel the raw, unbound fury of a star. The Soulfire Array. Around the orbit of Mercury, a ring of massive relay stations powered on. They aligned perfectly, creating a barrel made of gravity and magnetism, pointing directly outward toward the orbit of Mars. Aboard the Dominion flagship Apex, the fleet commander was watching the human stealth ships finally turn and flee. He allowed himself a brief, victorious hiss. They are braking, he announced to his bridge. Forward thrusters to maximum. We will chase them all the way to their homeworld. I want Earth's atmosphere burning before the next rotation. Commander, the sensor officer interrupted. His voice was not panicked. It was completely, utterly flat. The tone of a mind that had just encountered a data set it could not process. I am reading a thermal spike. From the human ships. No commander. From their star. The commander frowned, walking over to the sensor station. A solar flare. Their shields will protect us. Maintain course. It is not a flare, the officer whispered, his multifaceted eyes widening in absolute horror. It is directed. It is locked onto our formation. Temperature is reading at 15 million degrees. Before the commander could draw a breath to issue an order, the universe turned white. The Soulfire array fired. It was not a laser. It was not a plasma bolt. It was a continuous, sustained torrent of pure stellar core material accelerated to near light speed through the magnetic relays. A beam of white-hot creation and destruction wide enough to swallow a moon lanced out from the sun and struck the heart of the Dominion Armada. In the vacuum of space, there is no sound. There was no thunderous explosion, no roar of fire. There was only the blinding, terrible light. The beam struck the front lines of the Dominion spearhead. Shielding technology designed to repel lasers and kinetic impacts simply ceased to exist. It did not overload. It evaporated. The adaptive armor that the Dominion had feared from the human ships would have been useless here. This was the heat that forged atoms. The super dreadnoughts, the pride of the alien empire, did not shatter. They unmade. Their thick titanium hulls, their dark matter reactors, their crews, all of it flashed instantly into ionized gas. The beam swept through the tightly packed formation of 50,000 ships like a scythe through dry wheat. The sheer kinetic force of the stellar plasma pushed the vaporized remains of the Vanguard backward, creating a shockwave of superheated gas that melted the ships behind them before the beam even touched them. Deep beneath the Earth, the command center was bathed in a blinding white glow from the monitors. No one spoke. No one cheered. The operator stared at the tactical map in stunned, reverent terror. The massive cluster of red dots, representing the most powerful military force ever assembled, was simply wiping away. Time on target 1 minute, Thorne whispered, reading the telemetry. Core temperature holding. Magnetic relays at 80% capacity. Vance watched the slaughter with eyes like chip and flint. He felt no joy. This was the terrible math of survival. He was burning an empire to save a world. 2 minutes, Thorne counted. Out in the void, the surviving Dominion ships on the flanks of the Armada tried to break formation. Panic, absolute and unfiltered, shattered their military discipline. Warships collided with one another in a desperate bid to escape the localized supernova tearing through their center. But the Soulfire array was not a static weapon. The magnetic relays shifted, sweeping the beam across the spatial plane. It was a hose of stellar fire, washing away a colony of ants. 3 minutes, Thorne said, his voice trembling. Relays are overheating. We cannot sustain the siphon much longer without destabilizing the star. Hold, Vance commanded. The beam reached the rear echelons of the Dominion fleet. Ships that were desperately spinning up their slipspace drives were caught in the fringes of the plasma wash. Their drives detonated, tearing rips in space-time that swallowed neighboring vessels in imploding spheres of dark energy. 3 minutes and 45 seconds, Thorne gasped. Admiral, the tethers are melting. The array is going to critical. Disengage, Vance ordered. Vance pulled the brass switch backward. The keys were turned. Millions of miles away, the magnetic relays shut down. The torrent of stellar plasma severed from its source. The residual energy washed over the outer planets, painting the rings of Saturn with a temporary auroral glow. Then the dark returned to the solar system. But it was a different dark. The tactical screen in the command center updated. The massive red wave was gone. In its place was a sprawling, expanding nebula of superheated gas and scattered cooling slag. Scant the sector, Vance said, his voice breaking the absolute silence of the room. The operators snapped out of their trance, their fingers flying across their keyboards. Ganem, the tactical officer replied. He swallowed hard, looking at the numbers. He looked at them twice to make sure his mind wasn't playing tricks on him. Admiral, 84,000 Dominion vessels have been entirely vaporized. There is no wreckage, just dust. Another 40,000 are crippled, caught in the thermal shockwaves. 84,000 ships. Gone. Not damaged. Not retreating. Erased from existence in 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The surviving Dominion ships, scattered and heavily damaged, did not attempt to reform. They did not fire their weapons. Across all frequencies, the Void Warden's communication arrays were flooded with a chaotic symphony of alien voices. They were not shouting orders. They were begging. "They are powering down their weapons arrays," the comms officers said, looking up in disbelief. "They are broadcasting unconditional surrender codes. All of them, the entire surviving armada is yielding." The unbreakable Dominion had broken. 11,000 years of indoctrinated supremacy shattered in under 4 minutes by a species that had looked at the sun and decided to use it as a gun. "Admiral," Dr. Thorne said. His voice drew Vance's attention back to the secondary console. The holographic display above the Prometheus terminal had shifted. It was no longer showing the solar system. The targeting grid had automatically run a trace on the subspace wakes left by the massive Dominion fleet. It had mapped the direct route back to their staging grounds. Back to their capital. The screen displayed the planet Threx Prime, the heart of the Dominion. The array's capacitors are still holding a massive residual charge. Thorne explained, his eyes fixed on the spinning hologram of the alien world. "The targeting AI has locked onto their capital's coordinates. Admiral, we can initiate a localized quantum slipstream. We can channel the remaining plasma directly into the atmosphere of Threx Prime." The command center fell silent again. This was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of gods contemplating the fate of mortals. Vance looked at the red confirmation button glowing on the console. He knew exactly what was happening on that planet right now. 4,000 light-years away in the obsidian cathedral of the Grand Council chamber, High Arbiter Zaylock sat in absolute darkness. The emergency power had failed. The reports from the Grand Armada had stopped transmitting exactly 3 minutes and 45 seconds after engaging the human weapon. He was alone. The council members had fled. The royal guards had abandoned their posts, stripping off their armor and running into the chaotic streets of the capital, where millions of Dominion citizens were watching the sky, waiting for the fire to fall. Xylox looked up at the vaulted ceiling. He felt the cold stone of his throne beneath him. He had sent everything. He had emptied the Empire to crush an insect, and the insect had swallowed the galaxy. He knew that humans had the coordinates. He knew their weapon could reach him. He closed his multifaceted eyes, his mandibles trembling. He waited for the sky to burn. He waited for the end of his species. Beneath the Rocky Mountains, Silas Vance kept his hand hovering over the red button. "If we press it," the tactical officer whispered, "the Dominion is gone. No chance of a counterattack. No chance of rebuilding. The war is over forever." Vance stared at the hologram of Threx Prime. He saw the cities. He saw the billions of lives on that sphere. Yes, they were the architects of a cruel slaving empire. Yes, they would have glassed Earth without a second thought. If he pressed the button, humanity would instantly become the undisputed rulers of the galaxy. Every species, every star system would bow to Earth in absolute paralyzing terror. They would take the throne the Dominion had kept warm for 11 millennia. Vance closed his eyes. He thought of the young pilot Miller out in the dark. He thought of the blood spilled on the red dust of Mars. He thought of what it took to survive in a universe that wanted you dead. He opened his eyes. The ice in them had thawed, replaced by something far heavier. "No," Vance said softly. He reached down and pulled the brass key out of the terminal. The red confirmation light blinked out. The holographic projection of Threx Prime dissolved into harmless static. Thorne exhaled a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Admiral, if we fire that weapon at a populated world, we cross a line from which our species will never return," Vance said, turning to face his officers. The harshness in his voice was gone, replaced by a profound, weary clarity. "If we annihilate them, we don't end the Dominion. We just replace it. We become the very monsters we built this weapon to destroy." Vance walked back to the primary communication console. He looked around the room at the men and women who had just rewritten the history of the stars. "Open a universal broadcast channel," Vance ordered. "No encryption. I want every comms array, every slave colony, every Dominion surviving ship, and the High Arbiter himself to hear this." The comms officer nodded, his hands moving quickly. "Channel is open, Admiral. You are broadcasting to the entire galaxy." Silas Vance stood tall. He did not look like a conqueror. He looked like a man who had carried a terrible burden for a very long time, and was finally putting it down. "This is Admiral Silas Vance of the Void Wardens." His voice carried across the light years, echoing through the halls of burning mining colonies, ringing in the cramped cockpits of surviving fighters, and piercing the dark silence of Xylox's throne room. "To the Galactic Dominion, your armada is broken. Your military is ash. The age of your empire is over." Vance paused, letting the weight of the words settle across the stars. "Our weapon is aimed at your capital. We have the power to erase your species from the cosmic record. We have the power to take your throne." On Threx Prime, Xelox opened his eyes, staring into the dark, his breath catching in his throat. "But we refuse," Vance's voice echoed. "We refuse to be the masters of a universe built on fear. We did not fight this war to conquer you. We fought it to survive you. We are stepping back from the abyss." Vance looked at the camera lens, his expression resolute. "To the liberated worlds, to the species who have lived in chains, the stars belong to you again. Earth will not govern you. We will not police you. We are returning to our system to rebuild our homes and bury our dead." He leaned closer to the microphone, his final words a quiet, unbreakable promise. "We are not your rulers. We are not your saviors. We are your neighbors, and we ask only for peace. But remember the fire you saw today. Remember that we are a species that hunts the hunters. Choose your path forward very, very carefully." Vance reached out and severed the connection. The broadcast ended. The solar system was quiet. Outside, the remaining Allied ships moved slowly through the debris field, initiating rescue operations for pilots like David Miller, who floated in the dark, staring in awe at the space where an armada used to be. Deep beneath the earth, the hum of the servers continued. Silas Vance took off his command jacket and draped it over his chair. The war was over. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had proven it could be the most dangerous predator in the universe. But their greatest victory was not the destruction of the fleet. Their greatest victory was choosing not to pull the trigger.